You're sitting alone in your room, surrounded by that familiar silence. The interactions at work feel shallow. Small talk with strangers drains you. A creeping feeling of loneliness sets in that you can't quite pin down. Deep thinkers often find themselves isolated. Maybe it's because you see patterns others miss. Maybe it's because you ask questions that make people uncomfortable. The truth is, your mind simply goes places most people won't follow. This is how isolation begins for the deep thinker. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who mapped the human psyche, understood this burden intimately. He wrote about being a solitary, because I know things and must hint at things which other people do not know, and usually do not even want to know. Recent research confirms what Jung observed and personally experienced. Deep thinking creates a specific type of loneliness, not just about being alone, but a feeling that you are fundamentally different from the world around you. That normal people just don't understand you. This video will explore the hidden psychology of deep thinkers and why their reflective nature might be both their greatest gift and their heaviest burden. By the end, you'll understand why deep thinkers often choose solitude and discover a daily practice to transform that solitude into strength. But first, we need to examine what happens when your mind becomes both your sanctuary and your prison. Jung discovered something unsettling about the life of a deep-thinking individual. When you begin to see beneath the surface of things, you enter what he called a secret world that others cannot access or understand. You become the keeper of uncomfortable truths. You notice the masks people wear to survive. You see the patterns that repeat in relationships, in society, in human behavior. But this knowledge comes with a price. Jung described this as living with two personalities: the everyday self that navigates social expectations, and the deeper self that inhabits a temple-like realm where one beholds a vision of the whole cosmos. The thinking mind splits between these worlds, belonging fully to neither. You might find yourself exempted from group activities, not because you can't participate, but because your mind works differently. Jung was repeatedly excused from gymnastics and drawing, marking him as separate from his peers. Each exemption created freedom, but also deepened the gulf between him and others. The cost of this intellectual solitude is real. Jung wrote about meeting locked doors when trying to discuss his deepest concerns, sensing estrangement and distrust in others. The sad reality is that the very thoughts that give your life meaning become impossible to share without being misunderstood. In short, to think deeply is to accept a fundamental loneliness, to carry insights that isolate you, even as they illuminate your path. The next layer reveals how this isolation tricks your nervous system into seeing threats everywhere. Research shows that loneliness isn't about how many people surround you. It's about the quality of connection you feel. Deep thinkers experience what researchers call perceived social isolation, the distress from sensing that your social needs remain unmet, even in a crowd. This triggers something profound in your nervous system. Your brain interprets this disconnection as a threat to survival and activates what researchers term implicit hypervigilance for social threat. You start scanning conversations for signs of rejection. You expect negative interactions before they happen. The dismissive comments stick in your brain longer than the kind ones. Your mind, in an attempt to protect you, creates a self-reinforcing loop that ultimately pushes others away. Louise Hawkley's research reveals the mechanism behind this. Our model of loneliness posits that perceived social isolation is tantamount to feeling unsafe, and this sets off implicit hypervigilance for social threat in the environment. You become hypersensitive to social cues that confirm your differentness. When someone glazes over during your explanation of a complex idea, your brain files it as evidence that you don't belong. When colleagues change the subject from something meaningful to weekend plans, you feel the distance expand. The tragedy is that this hypervigilance, meant to reconnect you, actually drives people away. Others sense your guardedness and respond with their own distance, confirming your fears in an endless cycle. While building social skills or finding more people to talk to is an important part of the process, we must also recognize the other sides of loneliness. Understand that your nervous system is responding to a type of isolation that goes deeper than surface interactions. Which brings us to the three distinct layers of separation that deep-thinking minds have to navigate. Modern psychology identifies three levels of isolation that explain why deep thinkers struggle with connection: existential, intrapersonal, and interpersonal. Existential isolation is the recognition that you are fundamentally alone in your inner experience. No one can truly access your thoughts, your dreams, your private reflections. This awareness often intensifies for thinking minds because you spend so much time in that interior space. You become aware of what researchers call the incommunicable interior of each person. The very depth that enriches your inner life also makes you painfully aware of how separate we all are. This isn't depression. This is clarity about the human condition. Intrapersonal isolation happens when you disconnect from parts of yourself to avoid pain. Maybe you learned early that your sensitivity wasn't welcome, so you split off your emotional responses. Maybe your curiosity was met with annoyance, so you learned to keep your questions silent. Jung understood this as the price of adaptation. The choice you had to make wasn't moral, it was biological. You divided yourself to survive, but now parts of you remain unreachable, even to yourself. Interpersonal isolation is what most people recognize as loneliness, the felt distance from others. For deep thinkers, this often manifests as being physically present but emotionally absent from social interactions that feel superficial or draining. The research shows that meaning-making becomes crucial here. As one study notes, questions that are reflective and encourage deep thinking guide the individual towards creating a meaningful schema in which to understand stressful life events such as prolonged isolation. Your ability to reflect deeply isn't the problem. It's actually the solution. But you need to learn how to use it consciously rather than letting it run wild, ultimately feeding patterns that increase your isolation. The key lies in reframing your solitude from something that happens to you into something you can actively work with. Then you can start making positive changes. So, how do you transform this understanding into daily practice? The answer lies in what I call the threat detection audit, a simple practice inspired by various psychological concepts that interrupts the hypervigilance cycle and helps you reclaim your nervous system. This is a crucial step in shifting loneliness. Here's how it works. Step 1. Each morning, Spend 2 minutes noticing your automatic thoughts about upcoming social interactions. Write them down without judgment. You might notice thoughts like, "They'll think I'm weird," or "I won't have anything to contribute to their conversation." Step 2. Identify the hypervigilance patterns in these thoughts. Look for predictions of rejection, assumptions about others' judgments, or evidence that you're scanning for social threats before they exist. Step 3. Reframe using evidence-based truth. I appreciate my depth, and I am not defective. I'm exactly who I need to be. This isn't positive thinking. This is accurate thinking that counters your nervous system's false alarms. This practice works because it interrupts the automatic cycle before it takes hold. Instead of entering social situations already defended against imagined threats, you enter from a place of centered self-acceptance. I'm not telling you that you need to only become more social or to think less deeply. The goal is to stop your thinking nature from triggering a nervous system response that creates the very isolation you're trying to avoid. As you practice this, it can get easier to take those next gentle steps out of the prison of loneliness. You didn't choose to think deeply or to punish yourself with loneliness. You were born with a mind that sees beneath surfaces, that questions what others accept, that finds meaning in complexity. That's part of who you are. The isolation you feel isn't evidence that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that you are accessing parts of human experience that require solitude to develop. Jung knew this when he wrote about the rhizome that remains hidden beneath the visible life, nourishing everything that grows above ground. Some journeys require a bit of friction to transform us into the greatest version of ourselves. Your depth isn't a flaw to fix. It's a gift that comes with a specific type of challenge. And now you have a way to work with that challenge consciously, to transform the isolation from something that diminishes you into something that strengthens your authentic connection with yourself and others. You're not broken. You have a different journey to walk. I hope you can learn to fully enjoy every step you take, no matter what stands in your way. Thank you for joining me on this exploration into the psychology of deep thinkers. If this resonated, please share your reflections in the comments below and subscribe for more journeys into the depths of practical psychology, philosophy, and personal development. Until next time.